Good morning and welcome again. Uh, I've had some technical assistance, so I'm going to be able to show some slides and let you listen to a call to prayer and then some other photographs. So let's get started because there's a lot to cover today because of the prominence and presence and history of Islamic Christian relations. It's a complicated topic and one that is very, very important to me and very close to my heart because of friendships and students, and three of whom all have Islamic backgrounds, and they are all applying to PhD programs. And I'm still working with them, helping in some of the processes involved there. And it's also important to Jackie and me as a family because our daughter Megan married Hatem Morad, who was born in Cairo, Egypt, came here at age 4, and is also a United States Marine. Those of you who know Marines or have them in the family probably have heard that you never refer to a Marine as a former Marine or was in the Marine Corps. And one of their big statements is once a Marine, always a Marine.
Mhm.
He's 48 years old, but he's still all Marine and looks like it too. So this is it's been part of my life really ever since I was a Peace Corps volunteer to be in a predominantly Muslim community. So let me start by opening the slideshow, and one more click and I'm here.
I'm not sure.
Has everybody got it on their screen?
No, not,
Oops. I think I know what I did wrong. Hold on one second.
while he's doing that, he has some video at some point. So particularly at that point, if you would mute yourselves, that would help other people.
Love the beard, Terry.
Julia, should we also stop our video at that time so we don't take too much of the bandwidth?
It would not hurt to stop your video. Yes.
Okay,
You know how to do that. That would help. If you don't, it's not critical, but it certainly would help.
okay.
Thanks, Jackie.
Okay, I've got one more click, and there we go. Now have you got this on your screen?
We do not.
Oh, I hit slide. Julia, coach me. I hit slide share first.
Slide share and
Share
then
screen, I mean.
and share screen.
Okay,
There you go. That's it. We can see it.
but I can't. Okay, I'm going to call it up on my screen. And tell me if this jazzes you. If it does,
We see your video.
you don't have the file. You have it up on your screen now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, your PowerPoint is there.
And does it have the sidebar or is it without that?
Yep.
It has the sidebar.
Let's see if I can get. Now it
There you
doesn't?
go.
Well done.
Oh my goodness gracious, this is tension inducing. Okay, now I've hidden the thumbnails so I have all of this in front of me. I'm not going to read all of these, but I wanted to talk about them, and then we'll have questions. I think it would be best if you just go ahead and speak as we go along. If any of the information in these slides, because I've tried to distill what I know about Islam to the essentials. And please jump in with a question. The first statement after the title of the slide is intriguing to me because it's something that we believe as Christians, that if we don't put our faith into action, we're missing the whole point of it. We are called to be disciples of Jesus, and to be a disciple means to live out what Jesus taught and demonstrated. So for followers of Islam, the five pillars put faith first, not just trying to fit it around secular lives. And that's a very key statement. So the five pillars are Shahada, and that is how one becomes a member of a Muslim community, a follower of the Islamic faith. And it is reciting in Arabic, and I'm not going to try to do it in Arabic. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger. And the word translates both as messenger and prophet. Many of you know about ritual prayers done properly 5 times each day. The times are fixed but flexible. So if you have a job and you can't do midday prayers, you do them when you're done with your workday. And that's become a decision that people, managers have to make in the workplace. Zakat is the old-fashioned English word alms or charity to help the poor. What's fascinating is that we in Christianity have what percentage that we are supposed to tithe? Anybody?
10.
10%. And is that, I loved it when church people said, Pastor, is that 10% of gross or net? How would you answer that question if you were the pastor?
Gross.
Anybody?
Gross.
Should be. And why are the people asking the question? Because gross is more than net. And there's a range, and it's not just income, it's the total wealth. So if I had been born a Muslim and became a world-renowned scholar of comparative religions and had a teaching position at Harvard Divinity School and made $180,000 a year and had, Jackie, where would you like our second house to be?
Italy.
Okay, if we had a villa in Italy, uh, it would be an expectation that that would be part of our total wealth. And then we'd have to include the Ferrari convertible too. And I'm speaking
Hello,
humorously about it.
I'm good. How about yourself?
Whoops, somebody needs to mute, please. So it's different from tithing, simply your income. And then Psalm is fasting and abstinence from tobacco, from sexual intercourse, and it's done from sun up to sundown. Most of the followers of Islam whom I know say that it becomes easier after the first few days. You can sip water. If you have a medical condition that makes it impossible to fast, you're given an exception. But the design of this pillar is to allow people to identify with those who don't have food. And then the last of the 5 is Hajj to Mecca, pilgrimage, which is to be done at least once in the lifetime to fulfill the obligations spelled out in the Quran to be a faithful follower of Islam. And it's a fascinating prospect. It's something that obviously none of us can do, but it's a time of great peace. There's an influx of several million people during the holiday, and wealthy people pay vendors to give away food for free, and they also donate money. So if a person, say, in a wheelchair needs to go and has to have somebody to help, or if an elderly person goes and needs a caregiver or a nurse present, donations will allow those people to attend. And people all dress in the same clothes so that there's no hint of who's wealthy and who's not. Okay, now I need to, Julia, I'm asking for help because I want to go to my next slide. Is that here? There we go. Okay. I was pretty fussy with my students about trying to use correct terminology. Please forgive me for that. But the pronunciation is Muslim, not Muslim. That's really a kind of fabric in our American English pronunciation. And Muslim refers to both the people and the culture. It's easier if we separate that from the religious tradition of Islam. So I put some more information up here. From Arabic, it translates as one who submits. And I would change, because of the English connotation, to one who follows. But I'm not an Arabic speaker. The numbers, the former USSR, one of my former students who's applying to Oxford for a PhD is from Uzbekistan. North and South America, Africa, China, and Europe. And in the Arabic-speaking countries in the Middle East, that population is 18% of the world's Muslims. And in the world, 1.3 billion, 1 in 5 of people on our planet. And the largest percentage of followers of Islam is in Indonesia. It's because of settlement history and the spread from the Middle East. And I didn't do the math, but 80% of 235 is over 190 million people in my head. And the word Islam refers to the tradition itself, and it points to submitting to the will of Allah or following the dictates, the teachings of the Quran. And followers of Islam say that that brings peace on this earth and forever. Okay, other important terms. The Quran, and I spelled it in the transliteration from the Arabic because when it's spelled Koran, it's very easy to just call it the Koran. And it's Quran with a slightly trilled R. And it was presented to the Prophet Muhammad by Gabriel, the angel who bore the revelation of the sacred words. The religion of the time was polytheistic, worshiping a lot of idols, and it didn't work for Muhammad. At the time that he was troubled by this, he was a businessman, and the best thing to say is that he was in charge, it's a new word in English, of purchasing, shipping, billing, collection, and transportation of goods. And they were done by caravan. And he got into that business because he married a widow who was 20 years older than he, and she owned the business. He went off into a cave, and in most religious traditions, anytime somebody goes up on a mountain or in a cave or where else? By water, something important is going to happen, and you can fill in the blanks from the Bible. The Sermon on the Mount, the Transfiguration, the feeding miracle by the seashore, Jesus appearing to the disciples. All of those places are important. So in the cave, the prophet was approached by the angel Gabriel, and the angel said, "Speak." And he said, "Speak what?" And the Jibreel gave him the first surah of the Quran, very short. Surah refers to chapters, and there are 114 total, roughly the same size as our New Testament. In a series of visions and dreams, the prophet received all of the Quran, passed it on to his followers, and to this day, to write the Quran in calligraphy is an act of devotion, and many Muslims memorize 114 chapters. That fact amazes me, and I'll share that I took a course in memorizing scripture from a professor who had been a parish pastor for many years, and he created his own translation from the Greek of the Gospel of Mark, one of the shorter Gospels, and he would deliver it in a robe, brought his own lights, and had it memorized. And then he would ask people to make a donation to either his list of charities or their favorite charity. And he did it to show people how the Bible was first transmitted, which would have been orally, as the Quran was until it is written down. And it has not changed since it was first written down. Muhammad called for the best scholars of the day and brought them together, and it was recited, and they all agreed upon a text.
Terry, can I
Yes.
quickly jump in with a quick comment?
I'm not surprised. Go ahead.
Yeah, there's a Muslim school in Elgin, Illinois,
Mhm.
and it's from first graders all the way through 12th grade. And it's a residential school. And by the time the children, the kids, are graduated, every single one of those kids has memorized the entire Quran.
That is amazing. I would be happy if my English students could have memorized a 12-line poem.
Yeah, I couldn't get my kids to memorize the 23rd Psalm hardly.
Okay. And shame on me for not proofreading. I put my pointer, if you can see it, I misspelled prophet. Hadith is a secondary text, and we have them in Christianity. It's written or spoken and then later written traditions or narratives about what Muhammad said, did, or was like when he first established a community in Medina. What we have are biographies of saints, and for those of you who have any connection to Roman Catholicism, they have a larger Bible than Protestants, and it includes what are called the apocryphal books, meaning secret, or they're also called intertestamental because most of them were written between the writing of the Hebrew Bible and the Greek Bible. And some of those books are absolutely beautiful. The book of Judith is a very powerful tale, and oh, help me, Steve, if you know this. The prayer before marriage. I can't remember the name of the individual from one of the apocryphal books. I sometimes read it at Tobit, the book of Tobit. Thank you. And it's an absolutely beautiful book. The minarets are the tall towers for chanting, the adhan, the call to prayer. For some reason that I don't understand, what we would say is muzein, and it's pronounced muthi'in with your tongue between your teeth, is the cantor who chants the prayer to the call to prayer. And I've touched a button here. And that is a position of great honor. And then mosques have a little recessed area in the prayer hall that indicates the direction that you point towards for the Kaaba in Mecca. So it's the direction for praying. And then finally, the Kaaba is Arabic for a cube. It was believed to be a meteor. It's the central shrine of Islam in Mecca, and I'll show a picture of it later. And it was built in the time of Abraham after the meteorite landed. Now, some misunderstood terms, and I'm looking at the time here. I think we're doing okay. Yes. You've heard the term fatwa. Does anyone remember where you heard it? Because when I put up the definition, I remembered. Has anyone else ever heard it? Salman Rushdie wrote a book, and he's been in the news lately. And his book was declared heretical by one of the ayatollahs in the Middle East, and they issued a fatwa. It does not necessarily mean a death penalty. It means more commonly, It's a formal opinion treating a moral, legal, or doctrinal question. So a modern day example in other faith traditions would be papal bulls, a document that the sitting pope releases saying this is what Catholics believe. You could call Luther's 95 Theses a fatwa. You could call John Knox preaching at St. Giles Cathedral in Edinburgh, and he was a very outspoken man, a fatwa. The second term is Sharia, and we hear Sharia law all the time. An accurate Arabic translation means the path or the way, and I put the way in italics because we have that word in our scripture. I am the way, the truth, and the life. And then jihad is probably the most controversial term because when we hear it, what do we think of? Terrorists, bombings, and murder. For a follower of Islam, it does not mean that. What it does mean is struggle, difficulty, both internal and external, and exertion, trying to deal with something. And it refers to the obligation of all followers to struggle against error and idolatry. And we have that same issue in Christianity, and Judaism does as well, because people worshiped idols. I dare say some people in our country worship the idol of mammon. You know, wealth is more important than God. When I say community, I mean the United States, not our faith community at First Pres. Two kinds of jihad, the individual's personal struggle, and the lesser one is the struggle of the community to practice faith in freedom without restrictions. And this does include defending the community, and I'll come back to that. And then finally, caliphate. And it comes from the word caliph, which means the successors to Muhammad. That's how we got the Sunni Shia split, and I'll explain that later. And there were 4 caliphates, and the most famous started in 1517, oddly the same time that Martin Luther was doing his thing in Wittenberg with nailing the 95 Theses to the cathedral door and making the Pope angry. The Ottoman Empire, which lasted for centuries, and political leaders in other parts of the world want to reestablish a caliphate. It doesn't, in the true meaning of the word, it doesn't mean what it means in a scholarly historical point of view. It simply means an identifiable political entity. But these words get used in the newspaper, and we get caught up in common definitions that are not how a follower of Islam would use or understand the word. Okay, this is the interior of the Blue Mosque in Turkey. And you can see lots of stained glass, lots of light. The kind of curved pyramid and ring of lights is just for interior lighting. And you see people sitting and a prayer rug in the middle of this huge building. I'm going to show you one other shot. Oops. Let's see if I can enlarge this. I can't now, but that's looking from another direction. And here is I'm going to go back to the Blue Mosque in Istanbul. It sits on a hill. There are many other mosques in that capital city. And the Bosporus Straits separate the end of Europe. And Turkey has always had an identity issue of being the very eastern end of Europe and the very western end of the Middle East, separated by about 20 miles of water. And when you are out on a boat, I'm told, you can be 12 miles out and still see the Blue Mosque up on the hill. It was originally a Christian church built of wood by the Emperor Justinian, and that burned down. It was rebuilt, and then when the one of the caliphates overtook Istanbul, they made it into a mosque and painted over all of the Christian images. And then in the 1930s, when Ataturk was the ruler of the country, he declared it a democratic republic, and he was interested in Western ideas and Western progress. So it's been back and forth, and the current despotic ruler of Turkey, Erdogan, has just made it a museum and gotten rid of many of the interior architectural features, which is just a sort of loss to history and culture. This is the mosque in Mecca, and that rectangular cube that you see in the middle is built around the meteorite. When pilgrims go for Hajj, they circumambulate, walking around the Kaaba 7 times. They will raise a hand as if they're praying. They will touch it or kiss it, and it's clean as people walk around it. They let the next bunch go, but you can see the tremendous crowd there, and picture vendors outside giving away free food to people because of the patronage and honoring one of those pillars of charity. And then finally, a picture of the Taj Mahal. I talked about this before, but it has all the architectural features of a mosque, even though it's a tomb. And that reflects the history of India with the Mughals, who had intermarried with people up in the Khyber Pass, who would now be Afghans, and come down into India and took over India and established Islam as a very present faith, especially in southern India. The same emperor, Shah Jahan, who was behind the construction of the Taj Mahal, built the Red Fort in Delhi. And many of the buildings look like mosques in there. And in fact, it was a series of government offices. And the lawyers present will appreciate this. They did have open air buildings, which were courts where judges would hear complainants. Okay, now I'm going to close out, and I have one video. If I can, do you have the video on your screen now? No?
Yes, we do.
Yes, we do.
Okay, let me explain this, and I'm going to play it, and I'm going to turn mine down so there's no feedback in our 2 separate rooms here. This is a Mudda'in doing the call to prayer, and this brings together many of my interests. In Australia, where I've never been, but these are the Grampian Highlands, and they took the name from the Grampian Mountains in Scotland. And it's just an absolutely beautiful setting. And this is the call to prayer that I heard in Indonesia. I went to Nomensen University, named after a Danish Christian missionary, and did teacher training and curriculum development in the English department there. And every morning before dawn, I was wakened to this sound by a nearby mosque, and it's still hauntingly beautiful. The setting here is the other beauty of it, and I'm going to play about 45 seconds of it, and then I'll talk about it. Whoops.
أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله.
Okay. I'm going to read the English translation of what you just heard, and then I'm going to stop and take questions. Okay? Let me do. Okay. God is great, repeated 4 times. I bear witness that there is no God except the one God, repeated twice. I bear witness that Muhammad is the messenger of God, repeated. Hurry to the prayer, repeated. Hurry to salvation, repeated. God is great, repeated. There is no God except the one God. And I mentioned when I was in Indonesia, in North Sumatra for 2 weeks, there's a pre-dawn prayer for the earliest of the 5 appointed times. And this phrase is inserted before the last repetition of God is great. And what gets inserted in the pre-dawn prayer near the end is, prayer is better than sleep. Prayer is better than sleep. It's spoken twice or chanted twice for emphasis. And that just makes me smile. I've also, I know that in major cities where there's a dense population, a local mosque will get someone to literally go on foot and do the chanting of the pre-dawn adhan. And I've also been in New York City, and when it's an appointed time for prayer, I've seen people out walking, or they come out of buildings so they can know which direction they're facing in. And I even once saw a cab driver pull his cab over, pop the trunk, and look northeast towards Mecca and bring his prayer rug out and say his prayers. Just very interesting to me. So I'd like to stop for now and open this to questions about Islam.
Terry, this is Kevin. I can't remember the name of the black rock in Mecca, but can you tell us a little bit more about that stone and what it is and when it started and how in the world that relates to the 5 pillars or anything else in Islam, and what Muslims historically have thought that rock is and what people think it is today when they go there?
The Kaaba.
It's called the Kaaba, Kaaba. It is believed by followers of Islam to be a meteorite that landed during the time of Abraham. And if we go back to Steve Denny's presentation on Abram and Sarai and Hagar, everyone remember that story? Hagar gave birth to Ishmael, and she was summarily removed from the household. She was at risk of dying of thirst, and God caused a spring to gush forth, and that gave her water, and she lived with her son Ishmael. The meteorite that landed in Mecca is believed to be from the time of Abraham, and the shrine of the Kaaba is built around it in order to house it inside. So it is stated in the Quran that if you are able to make a pilgrimage to Mecca, you should do this once in your lifetime. And that's why people donate money for the elderly, for the poor, for those who need assistance to make a pilgrimage. And it's a huge honor when people from small villages do it. There are verses from the Quran written all over the walls of the buildings in the village to honor the person who returned.
When the when the Quran was written and suggested that people should make a pilgrimage to Mecca, was there a black rock for people to go see in Mecca, or where did this black rock come from that it became part of the pilgrimage?
It was a meteorite. And
No, but when Muhammad or Jabril told Muhammad to tell the people and write down the Quran, go to Mecca once in your lifetime, was there a black rock? Were they supposed to go there to see this black rock? Or how did the black rock become part of the Hajj?
I don't know. And I assume it happened during the time of Abraham, because the story about it includes, or the practice includes, in Arabic, the word is zamzam. And in the Quranic version of the story of Hagar, she went between two hills and found a spring. It's different from our Hebrew Bible. So Muslims will do a reenactment of that as part of their pilgrimage to remember Hagar as Ishmael's mother.
So when the Quran says do a pilgrimage to Mecca, does it talk about the black rock?
I'd have to look up the text, and I will, Kevin. And
Okay.
I'm going to get my tablet out. Okay, other questions?
Is there a
Yeah.
concept of heaven as the ultimate goal of the five pillars?
Yes.
Is it similar to heaven that we understand in Christianity?
There are passages about virgins and lush fruit, and I can't answer that question, Terry, because I'll come at it obliquely. When I would preside at a funeral, I would always bring up the promise of resurrection life, and I would always talk about heaven, and I would say we have popular notions of heaven and pearly gates, and we have jokes about where the Lutherans and the Presbyterians and the Methodists will live and who's going to get in, but we don't know what it's like. I mean, do the angels have wings? When we did our Christmas thing of watching It's a Great Life, that angel didn't. He hadn't earned them yet. So it's hard to make a comparison, but I'm going to do my best and I'll get back to you. Other questions?
Barry, there's multiple, I've read several biographies and other works about Muhammad and Islam, and there's multiple versions of how long it took to actually write down the sayings that Muhammad was given, and of the multiple versions and of them being collected by one person and all of the others being burned. Most of the, well, I won't say most because I haven't talked with all my Muslim friends and students, but of the exchange students that we had that have stayed with us over time, they were not aware of this. They say it's never changed. I don't know how much of this is rewritten, or what's your take on it?
Okay, that's a complicated issue of textual transmission. And the best answer I can give you now, and I'm going to do some digging on it, is that what you said and learned is essentially correct, that Muhammad gathered the best scholars of the day. They brought in literally fragments and scraps and longer pieces from all over, and he sat them down, and they came up with, for lack of a better word, the definitive version of what they thought as his followers the text should be. Once that was written down, and it was by the caliph at the time of the prophet's death or shortly thereafter that it was written down, it has not changed since then. So an analogy that's imperfect would be the King James Version, where James VI gathered everybody. And the Bible has changed since then because of research and the discovery of manuscripts at Qumran in a vase in a cave that a shepherd discovered. And Steve Denny knows a lot more about that than I do. But, and we have different translations. Frequently we'll hear the Message, and Eugene Peterson is a scholar, and it's a beautiful rendition.
Mhm.
And I respect the majesty of the language of the King James Version, but it's pretty inaccurate on some critical passages because we didn't have the linguistic expertise.
Mhm.
So it was set, and it hasn't changed since it was set, and the setting of it was not dissimilar to other religious traditions and the sacred texts.
So it was not 300 or 400 years later, which
No.
some stories say.
Well, yeah, and if you have if you have a reference to that, and I'll look myself too, because that's a question I'm curious about. Okay, other questions?
The Muslims do not believe in reincarnation, do they?
No.
Not in the Hindu sense of it, no. But they believe in an eternal life,
Mhm.
but not as reincarnation.
Larry, you
Although,
said that, when you're defining caliphate and jihad and all that, would you say that, I don't know, the Sunni or the Shia, do they have another interpretation of that?
It, it's a very hard question to answer, Chuck, because we're talking about there are three main divisions in Islam. The Sunni is predominant. The Shia felt that it should be a direct descendant of Muhammad to be the caliph. And they're in the minority, and they've been fighting ever since the separation happened before the millennium, the first millennium. So your question is trying to justify or trying to explain divisions within one faith tradition, and you can't separate that from the politics.
You said there were three. What's the third?
The third is the Sufis.
More the severity of, in other words, I don't think we've developed this idea that jihad means, killing and getting rid of the infidels. I thought that comes somewhat from sects of Muhammad, Islam.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm going to see if I can't come up with a better answer, but for now I'm going to stay with it's too complicated for right now. Marianne asked about the third major division of Islam, and it's the Sufis, who began in the 12th or 13th century. I'm not sure. I'll look that up and let you know exactly. And Rumi was a famous poet. If you've ever heard the term whirling dervish, does it call anything to mind? Sandstorms? There's a beautiful documentary film, and I'll put it out in a mailing list or bring it up at our last class next week, that shows Sufi mystics in long fitted robes, and they flare at the bottom at ankle length, and they dance themselves into a trance. It's absolutely beautiful, and it's done in small villages. It's also done formally as an act of worship. And the Sufis would be similar to sects of Judaism who wrote the Kabbalah, not to be confused with the Kaaba. And they would be comparable to some of our saints in Christianity. Julian of Norwich in the Middle Ages who had visions, Teresa of Lisieux, uh, the desert fathers and some desert mothers who, once Christianity became the official religion of the empire in 313, when Emperor Constantine said, "Stop killing the Christians, it's the religion I've converted to." Some people became disaffected with Christianity and they went out into the desert. St. Simeon Stylites sat on a post on top of a tree for 40 years. That's, I mean, I would love to go to a monastery for a month of private retreat. But even if I was 25, I don't think I'd like to go for 40 years. And yet there is that tradition in all three faiths. And the Sufis are not often studied or thought of. The literature is absolutely beautiful. Other questions? I'm checking the clock again too. And I'm going to make a teacher decision in a few minutes here.
Terry, I'm wondering if there are individuals who are leaders like the Pope or like an archbishop for the Sunnis, the Shias, the Sufis. One question. Another question is, we know that Muhammad, I've heard about his wives, but I've not heard anything about children. Does he have any children that, like, is there somebody now who's a 25th great grandchild of Muhammad? The other thing I just want to mention is I love your comments about the Sufis. Many of us have studied the Enneagram as a tool of personal growth.
Yes.
And it was likely created by Sufis.
Not likely, it was. And I'll explain that and then I'll come back to your other questions. I did a day-long seminar with clergy from all different faiths at the Catholic Theological Union, led by an Enneagram expert. And it is a tool, I want to be careful, like Myers-Briggs, the personality profile created by two psychologists, but much more subtle and also precise. And when I took the Enneagram test, I matched up to my Myers-Briggs quadrants, primary and secondary, absolutely perfectly. And I knew that it came from the early Middle Ages. So, and the Sufis had it figured out long before two American psychologists, PhDs, did. I mean, there's nothing new, and that just tickles me. Yes, he had children, and I know nothing more than that, but I will look it up for you. And I don't know if the genealogy, just like the genealogies in the Bible,
How do you spell the Enneagram?
Enneagram. And Marianne, I'm making a note to send you information on that.
Oh, thank you.
Give you the standard book because it's fascinating. Okay, I'm going to make a decision here. Next week, we're going to do, or I am making a decision. We're going to do Judaism and Islam and Christianity, excuse me. I did that for a reason. The questions you're giving me are very interesting, I think, and productive for the whole group. So I would like to, and I'm not asking for a vote. If you have strong objections, please speak up. What I'd like to do is put my information on Sikhism just into a file with the pictures I have in the PowerPoint and send that to you. I don't mean to short circuit it. I'm simply making a leader's decision that the discussion we're having is more important. And next week, when we do Judaism and Christianity, my experience has been that what we lay people know of Christianity is not as much as pastors or priests know, because those of us who went to seminary study it for at least 4 years and continue studying it afterwards and have to teach it. I taught at the seminary as an adjunct and taught early and medieval church history, which is a secondary field of mine after medieval lit and linguistics. And I want to cover some critical aspects of Christianity that start with the Edict of Constantine in the 4th century, and then talk about the spread of Christianity, how we got so many denominations, the Reformation, the Counter-Reformation, the Inquisition in Spain, a whole lot of topics that tie together. So that's what I'm going to do. It's now 12:07, and I'm going to stay and answer questions as long as someone has them. And if you need to drop out at 12:15, don't worry about it. Think of it like the church service that goes an hour and 15 minutes when people start to fidget. And I'll just give you one anecdote. Parishioners in the last congregation I served, the men in leadership were waiting for me after coffee hour. It happened 3 times, and it was never a fun discussion. And at this time, they said, good sermon today, Pastor, and really enjoyed it. And it was a lot going on. And I told them, yes, we had these extra events, a baptism and somebody doing a minute for mission. And they said, did you know the service went an hour and 15 minutes? I said, no, I didn't know that. I do my best to keep it an hour. Well, we wondered if you could cut out one of the scripture readings. And yeah, Terry Studer just raised his eyebrow and Chuck is laughing. And I said, well, pausing for time, I could, but I'd have just a very difficult time deciding which one. Should we take out the Psalm? Should we take out the Hebrew Bible? Should we take out one of the epistles? We can't take out the gospel. And they just looked at me, knowing what I was doing. And I said, I'll tell you what, you bring it to worship and music and see what they say. And of course, the worship and music committee said, no, we can't cut out. There was also a clock with a chime on it in the transept across from where the choir sat on either side of the chancel in the front where the altar is. After about a month there, I just went up and looked at that little clock and turned the chime off because it would ring at 12 noon. And I'd be giving the benediction and I'm hearing dong, bing, bing 12 times. Such is the life of a pastor. Other questions?
If someone doesn't ever make the Hajj, is that what happens there? And is it, are women, is there a differentiation between what women are expected to do as far as the 5 pillars and men?
No distinction on the 5 pillars. And it's, how can I say this? It's urged, and if you don't have a good reason, it's like, it's probably analogous to committing a sin. And I'm making a note to ask a very knowledgeable Muslim friend. But I don't think it would be, you've fallen short of one pillar if you're able and don't go. That's my best answer for now. Other questions? Joy.
Yeah, so I've been hearing about a lot of conversions to Christianity in the Muslim world. And sometimes when I hear about them, it's presented as though people who convert become like Christ, like something like this, something like Muslim Christ followers. And I'm wondering to what extent are the religions compatible enough that someone can be Muslim and Christian or a Christ follower?
That's a new one, and I'm going to do some research to see if I can find some stats. But my answer to you would be, uh, I don't see how that could be possible to follow both traditions.
Mhm.
Uh, I, I recited Hebrew scripture at a wedding, and I was asked to by the groom and met the rabbi who performed the wedding. When Jackie and I got there, they had a basket with yarmulkes, and I put it on out of respect. And I looked at Jackie and I said, I think Martin Luther is going to send a thunderbolt down on me sometime for this. But I walked in and I read the Hebrew, and I held the chuppah, the four-cornered tent that's over the bride and groom, as part of my obligation to our friend. And that didn't make me a Jew, but I was participating in a rabbinical wedding. Uh, Similarly, when I go to a mosque, I can't say prayers in Arabic, but I can perform the ritual washing of ears, nose, face, mouth, and I can still touch my head down to the floor. So I do that. When I'm in a Buddhist country, if I'm going to walk around a temple, uh, they have recessed niches. I showed the prayer flags for Buddhism. Well, they have them stamped on a brass wheel. That's effectively a spindle. So you walk and you spin, you put your hand on it and turn it, and you're praying, and the spindle is doing the words for you, if you will. But you have to be one or the other. You can go visit and cross over and come back. But I made a note to look up statistics on this, and I will talk to someone and have a specific answer.
And I'm wondering if one converts, they're not both, they're one or the other. And that's different from maybe someone who holds a belief in both religions. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but if you convert, aren't you giving up one faith tradition and moving to another?
By definition, yes. And you raise a good point. Would someone introduce me to this woman? I really like her. So I can, what's your name again?
You should be so lucky.
I'm sorry, that's not fair to do that.
Yeah, you know, those of us really cannot figure out how you got her to say yes.
Not now, Stephen, but another time you ask her, she'll tell you the story.
I think conversion is sort of a definition that's different in different people's minds. If it's somebody going up to the altar and making a public statement, that's one thing. If it's believing in your heart, you know, how do you define where's the line that you crossed? Or did you not have to cross the line? And I think maybe that's what Joy is asking.
Yeah, and that's why I responded. It's another way of saying it. It's very helpful, Marianne. I can't and will not commit to another religion because I've spent my life as a Christian, even though I wasn't baptized till I was in my 30s. That was parents and my own embarrassment. And it was a very powerful baptism with my two children at the time holding my hands. And I knew what was going on. So I can't ever leave that, but it doesn't prevent me from participating, being enriched by. And if I were to convert to Buddhism, I would have to give up Christianity. If I were to convert to Islam, I would have to say the Shahada, and that's all that's required. And it says, I believe there is only one God, Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger. And I believe there's a Hebrew God. I believe that there is and I'm going in chronological order, a Christian God and an Islamic God. And they are all related linguistically and etymologically, the names for God. are they the same? Some people ask, and I say yes and no. Yes and no, because I speak the other names, Elohim, Yahweh, Allah, with great respect, but I pray to God. If that's a distinction, but I'm not converting, if that helps.
One more little take on Joy's question, Terry. Some of the Messianic Jews that I've met in the last 10 or 15 years call themselves completed Jews. They're Christ followers now, but they still maintain a Jewish heritage, a Jewish culture, and keep kosher, et cetera, et cetera. And they call themselves completed Jews. Do any Muslims who convert see themselves as completed Muslim?
Don't know.
There are many Muslims who've become Christians, but if they become a Christian in a Middle Eastern country, they do so at the risk of death. And so I think Joy's question is, how do you do both? Well, some of them kind of pretend to be Muslim. They follow some of the Muslim traditions just in order to keep their family happy and in order to stay alive. But they consider themselves believers in Isa, in Jesus, and they are Muslim only culturally at that point. And then there are Muslims in the United States who become Christians who freely worship and say they're Christians because here they're protected and they're free to do that. So they aren't really both. I mean, they're Muslim culturally, but they are believers in Jesus once they've committed to Jesus. They are converted. And there's some powerful stories of Muslims being converted. And I can recommend several books, and you can find people online, but they have to be very careful because often they do it at the risk of death. I mean, especially if they're a woman. So.
Okay. Yeah, I want to pursue that further, and I'll send you an email, Karen. It also.
I just had a comment on that, hearing the different things about the religions that we've talked about, it just reminds me that when we speak to somebody about our Christianity, we have to be aware that it can sound pretty strange to them. And just recognize that.
Your point is very well taken, Chuck, because when I was serving as a lay missionary, the two big questions I got were, okay, now you're here and you've joined the Presbyterians and the Baptists and the Methodists and the UCC people and the, they started rattling off why are there so many Christians? Well, I had an answer because I had taught church history. But the other question was about communion. Is that really the body and blood of Jesus? And the only answer is, well, it depends. If you're a Catholic, you have this doctrine of substantiation based on Greek philosophy, and it's transformed at the moment that the priest says the words of institution. If you're Presbyterian, it's a symbol. If you're Baptist, you can't drink wine, Southern Baptist. If you are a Lutheran, you have a clever Martin Luther who wrote in Latin and German, Christ is in, with, and under the sacrament. And okay, but what does that mean? So yeah, it's very difficult to explain Christianity to other religions, aspects of Christianity.
Yeah.
And when I shared with some of my friends, they asked about my faith journey. My teaching colleagues, all Buddhists, one Christian from Myanmar, who converted because of his parents and Baptist missionaries there. When I shared my faith journey, they would say to me, "Were you ever worried that you were going to go to hell because you weren't baptized?" And I said, I participated in church so much, and it wasn't a question of a record or points, it just didn't come on my screen. And it wasn't my fault that I wasn't baptized. It was my fault that I got kicked out of communion, confirmation. But, baptism was a choice I made at a time when I felt I was ready for it. And I've had the joy of baptizing people in their 70s. And this morning I talked to a friend of 25 years, and I baptized him after doing a funeral for a close friend of his, and he wanted to talk about baptism, and it developed into church membership and a friendship that's lasted a quarter of a century. Okay, I'm just reminding you it's 12:22, and Julia doesn't have an overtime slip there, I don't think. There are other burning questions. Can I ask that you email me, and I'm happy to respond, and I will, if there's no other questions, ask Julia to send me a list again of who attended, please. And thank you all very, very much. You've given me notes that I have here written down to follow up, and it's been a very productive discussion. I really appreciate your presence. Next week, I'll get you the mailing out by tomorrow on Sikhism and start with 5 minutes of questions. I'll try to anticipate them. And then we'll do Judaism and Christianity, and I'll have a focus on each faith tradition to allow time for questions like this.